that you might want to look at as we go through this is this picture page. Of course, the bottom is the altar. The top is a diagram of kind of what we're talking about. So if you need another diagram, I've given you several, but you know what? It doesn't hurt to look at different ones. It helps. Here's you can look and kind of see and follow along with us for this week if you need that. All right, so let's check out 46 verse 1. Thus says the Lord God. Notice here that this is not the angel speaking to Ezekiel at this point. This is actually God himself that is talking to him, and he's talking about the gateway of the inner court. Now we're going to talk about a lot of gates, so let's be sure that we kind of keep it clear what we're talking about. The gateway of the inner court. So if you look, you can see that that's the ones that's closest to the sanctuary, that faces towards the east, shall be shut 6 working days. But on the Sabbath, it's going to be open for the people. And on the day of the new moon, it's going to be open for the people. We talked about the Sabbath coming every week, of course, and the new moon is usually just one per month when the actual new moon shows up in the sky. And those are the days where it's going to be open. We read a few verses later that it's going to be open so that sacrifice can be offered. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Number 2, verse 2, the prince shall enter by the way of the vestibule of the gateway from the outside and stand by the gatepost. That fits perfectly with what we have been talking about previously. We know that the prince has the porchway is where we were told in our earlier chapter that he was able to go and actually eat the fellowship meals in front of the Lord there. And so he's going to have that vestibule porchway area that he is going to have access to. Only the prince would have access to that. So he can go in through that way and stand by the gatepost. The priests shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings. So there are some people who, based on what we've just previously read, who like to think that the prince himself is making these offerings. This clears that up. He is not a priest. That is not his job to offer that. His is to prepare it and to make the offering. But there will be priests who literally are going to go and prepare the burnt and the peace offerings. He, or the prince, shall worship at the threshold of the gate. He shall go out, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. So he can see the altar in the sanctuary from where he's at. He can, and from that vestibule area, and it will remain open until that evening. Number 3, likewise the people of the land shall worship at the entrance of this gateway before the Lord on the Sabbaths and the new moons. And so that explains to us why it's going to be open until the evening, because after the prince is done, they can go to the gateway up to, and that reminds us of our tabernacle study, because remember the people came to the front of the tabernacle and stood. They couldn't go any further, but they came up to the front of it and stood oftentimes waiting for instruction or worshiping or whatever they needed to do of the tabernacle. And so the same sort of thing is seen here. They can come up to this gateway of the east gate. They can worship, participate until the evening, at which time that gate's going to be shut. Verse 4, the burnt offering that the prince offers to the Lord on the Sabbath day shall be 6 lambs without blemish and a ram without blemish. So we read about something very familiar in Numbers chapter 28. Somewhere around verse 9, you're going to start reading about the same, what is normally offered on the Sabbath day. This is more than what the Mosaic law had them give on the Sabbath day. This is a different formula. Again, one of the things that throws the Jewish people today, because they know that this is not what was established under the Mosaic law back in Numbers chapter 28. Verse 5, and the grain offering shall be 1 ephah for a ram, and a grain offering for the lambs, as much as he wants to give, as well as a hin of oil with every ephah. So along with the rams on the Sabbath, or with the lambs on the Sabbath, and a ram without blemish, there's going to be grain offerings for the ram, a grain offering to be included with the lambs. I think it's interesting how much is going to be included with that, as much as the prince wants to give. that kind of makes me think about if you were standing in front of the Lord and you're making an offering to him and he says, bring me as much as you want to bring. I don't know where does that end?
Yeah.
Because of course you kind of in your heart of hearts feel like if you're standing in front of the Lord, there's just no end to what you would want to bring as an offering. But you rein that in just a little bit when you stop and think about our New Testament teaching, which is we're not under a tithe system in our New Testament. We're under an offering, each man giving generously as he's purposed in his own heart to give.
It's like when Moses said, bring stuff to build, and they just gave more than...
They gave more. And so we can see that while in our New Testament teaching, that giving generously as you purpose in your own heart, everybody has a certain figure that they stay, under or in or whatever. We do have limits, even though it's the same sort of teaching, isn't it? Give as much as you purpose and want to give. And so it's just interesting to me that with God, it's never, in some areas, he's very specific about the formula he wants given, but in other areas, what does it become?
Heart matter.
That heart matter, right? Of let me just leave this open and see where the end is. And so even the prince is going to be held to that same standard of he can give as much at that point as he wants to give. I just find that so interesting. Mm-hmm. Verse 6, on the day of the new moon, it shall be a young bull without blemish. It's the burnt offering. It shall be 6 lambs and a ram. So that's being on the new moon. What's being added there is that young bull or the burnt offering. And they shall, of course, be without blemish. That follows everything that we know God expects for them to give out of perfection. Verse 7, he shall prepare a grain offering of an ephah for the bull, an ephah for the ram, as much as he wants to give for the lambs, and a hin of oil with every ephah. Verse 8, when the prince enters, he shall go in by way of the vestibule of the gateway, again another term for the porchway that he has some access to, on the appointed feast days. So now we're talking about not just the Sabbath and not just the new moons, but any appointed feast days. And we've already discussed Passover and Feast of Tabernacles. We know those are going to be there. And whoever enters by the way of the north gate to worship shall go out by way of the south gate. And whoever enters by way of the south gate shall go out by way of the north gate. He shall not return by the way of the gate through which he came, but he shall go out through the opposite gate. I have to tell you, when I was reading this week, this made me giggle. It's just a detail that made me laugh. And the reason why is because he is setting up an orderly fashion for a line.
Mm-hmm. It's traffic control.
It's traffic control.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just so godlike to be orderly and to know that people have a tendency to just sort of, mess things up and linger and do goofy things. And God is a God of order, and he's very specific that he wants this to be done. So he's saying if you go in one way, you go out the opposite, or vice versa. If you come in that way, you go out. So that, of course, leads this very orderly in and out, egress and exit. It's just
as opposed to trying
It's
to be
his
more
character.
powerful and important.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, he's very much setting up what he'd like to see for that. So it's a systematic way of going in and out, large crowds going in and out of those outer gates where they would be coming through. All right, verse 10. The prince shall be in their midst, and when they go in, he shall go in, and when they go out, he shall go out. And so he's wanting the prince to not necessarily always set himself apart, that there will be times when he will mingle in with the crowds. The purpose of that would be what? What would you think would be the purpose for having the prince intermingle with that?
Communication or fellowship.
There you go. So fellowship would be a good one to while this prince definitely has honored positions in this, he wants him to have a relationship with the children of Israel. There's to be no jealousy. There's to be no hard feelings about anything. There's to be no resentment towards the powerful there, but it's to be a loving relationship of the man who is in charge of making the offerings for these very people is to be one of them at times too, so that there's a familiarity between them. So I just, I think that's a really cool detail.
That's lost in so many of the big churches today. When I was growing up, the minister always greeted you on your way out
Sure.
and chatted. That
That's a
doesn't
good
happen
point.
anymore.
That's a really good point, is that you, there's a different way that you feel about your leaders, whether it's elders or, you know, pastors or deacons or your Bible study teacher or whoever it is. There's a way you feel about them when they greet you warmly as a friend versus they don't know your name. There's a connection that's lost. So that's a really good point, another reason.
But this is in the millennial kingdom, so there
Yes.
wouldn't be any jealousy.
Well, and these are all just setting up the perfect way to make sure that doesn't happen. And we know that
But
eventually,
there's people there
There's,
too.
these
Yes,
are
well,
people
there's people, but
in their human bodies.
right, but
There could be jealousy.
because we have that nature. And we do know that in the millennial kingdom, while everything starts out on this great note, we know that by the end of the 1,000 years, things have once again become rebellious. And these very people that he has set up all of this glorious time for, this time that should be perfect, because remember, Satan is confined
it's-
for 1,000 years, and Jesus Christ is in their midst, and they have this representative of this priest, of this prince, and all of this is going on, and God has set up so there should be no jealousy. Everyone has land. We're going to find out there's all kinds of glorious agriculture, things that are given to them. We find out that sinful nature of man still rears its ugly head, and that at the end of it, there's another rebellion of people against God, even
and
during
I
all
always
of that.
thought that the peace and that the 1,000 years is without any, sin or whatever. And it's only when Satan is released that sin rears its ugly head.
No, it's not. We human beings have a sin nature. Thank you, Adam.
Yes.
Right? And so
Because
we
people
have
are gonna
a
be
sin
born,
fate.
and they have that.
That's right. And
Doesn't
so
it say outside of the wall, they're liars, sinner, all sorts of evil going on.
Well,
So-
I
Where
think
does that
during
say
the
that?
millennial kingdom, Christ is going to rule with an iron scepter, and people are not going to be getting away with anything. If they commit a crime, they're going to be judged swiftly.
consequences.
So, it's going to be heart matters, and some people will just
Revelations.
probably try to act right, but maybe their heart isn't going to be right. And especially the kids that are born, they'll have to make a decision for Christ or against him.
Everyone who is in a human body has to make a decision for the Lord, yes or no. And that includes these people that will be born and in human bodies during the millennial kingdom will have to make a decision of whether or not they choose Jesus Christ as their King and Messiah. And he's sitting right there, so the choice should be
right there.
easy.
Yeah, and they won't be able to blame the environment
Yes.
or Satan or
I mean, he's right
their
there.
sinful
Exactly.
behavior.
And so the fact that they would choose that on their own becomes all the more appalling. When we get towards the end of the 1,000-year time frame and we see that rebellion and we see all of these people, we know that there are a lot that are going to come against him at the end time. We can't even absorb that. Because you think, why? How is that possible? Well, it's possible because human nature is human nature. It's just who we are born with. That's why everybody needs a Savior. Everybody needs a Savior. Nobody is good enough on their own. Just another example of that. Okay, so we're in where are we at? 11. At the festivals and the appointed feast days, the grain offering shall be an ephah for a bull, an ephah for a ram, as much as he wants to give for the lambs, and a hin of oil with every ephah. Now, when the prince makes a voluntary burnt offering or a voluntary peace offering to the Lord, the gate that faces towards the east shall then be opened for him, and he shall prepare his burnt offerings and his peace offerings as he did on the Sabbath day. Then he shall go out, and after he goes out, the gate shall be shut. So another example of these free will offerings, the prince is going to be able to go in and make a free will voluntary offering above and beyond what was the mandatory offerings. That was part of the Mosaic system. There were mandatory offerings and there were free will offerings, and people always had the choice of deciding how much and what they wanted to give. I think God does that for a very specific reason that we've just discussed, because if he told everybody exactly what to give, if he told you, you must give X amount of money and property and all of that, and you only will go right up to that line, then there's an examination that needs to happen on. So the free will voluntary offerings are always a way to just sort of, it's not the only way by any means, it's a way though of sort of judging a heart matter in certain things and what you're willing to do. And so we see an example of that here, that there will be free will offerings for the prince to make. Verse 13, you shall daily make a burnt offering to the Lord of a lamb of the first year without blemish, and you shall prepare it every morning. So now we're talking about not the feast days anymore and not all of that, but these are daily offerings. So in the Old Testament times, the Jews were given specific instructions. They were to have two daily offerings. They were to have a morning daily offering and an evening daily offering. And that was to happen every single day. And then additional offerings on feast days, additional offerings on Sabbaths, additional offerings at different times. But a morning and an evening sacrifice was always given. It appears to be that there is just simply going to be one daily offering under this new kingdom theology. And so he's going to make the daily offering is going to be a lamb without blemish in the first year. And 14, and you shall prepare a grain offering with it every morning, 1/6 of an ephah and 1/3 of a hin of oil to moisten the fine flour. This grain offering is a perpetual ordinance. That just means it's going to be ongoing. It's not going to cease, to be made regularly to the Lord. Thus they shall prepare the lamb, the grain offering, and the oil as a regular burnt offering every morning. So you can see why the Jews, after reading Exodus 29 or Numbers 28, and they know that there's that morning and evening sacrifice to be given. Here's another example. Where's the evening sacrifice? What's going to happen? Where did it go to? Now, I would assume that their rabbis are teaching them something similar to, we'll add it. Because they're very sure that that's what needs to be done. It's obvious that Ezekiel forgot to put that in there. So I would not be a bit surprised if that's not the rabbinic teaching on it. I'm just throwing that in there kind of funny, but that is sort of the way that it's done. But there is no mention of any evening sacrifice here.
Everybody is supposed to do this?
This is going to be a daily offering that's going to be given to the Lord. And so the priest will take care of this.
Will the prince be the one that does the
Preparing.
The prince will,
He's
he's going to be in charge of the feasts and the Sabbaths and the voluntary and the free wills. It appears that this daily offering will be very similar to the way it was done in the Mosaic system, which is the priests prepared it every morning and every evening. In this case, they'll prepare it every morning under this formula. All right, verse 16, we're going to talk about the prince and his inheritance laws. So thus says the Lord God. Again, the angel's taken out of this. This is directly from the mouth of the Lord. If the prince gives a gift of some of his inheritance to any of his sons, it shall belong to his sons. It is their possession by inheritance. Notice that of some is in italics. It's been added. In the original, it reads, if the prince gives a gift of his inheritance. So I'm assuming that of some was added to clarify. They thought we needed that. I don't understand that. That's why I brought that up, why they put that in there. It is a possession of inheritance. In verse 17, but if he gives a gift of some of his inheritance to one of his servants, it shall be his until the year of liberty, after which it shall return to the prince. But his inheritance shall belong to his sons. It shall become theirs. All right, so all he's saying here is that those two strips of land that if you go back on last week's map and look at, that were given to the prince, that is the prince's. So he can do whatever he chooses to do with the land that was given directly to him. So he can give it to his sons. If he gives it to his sons, then it is theirs. It's permanently theirs. It's theirs. If he gives it to his servant, or I'm assuming anyone else, a friend or anybody that he chooses to give it to, it will be theirs until the year of liberty. The year of liberty. It goes by another name. Who can tell me what the other name?
Jubilee.
The year of Jubilee. And we all know that the year of Jubilee was to come once every
50 years.
50 years. On that 50th year, that was the year of Jubilee. Under the Mosaic law, anything that was gifted or given, whether it be land or any possession that was gifted or given, on the 50th year, did what? It returned back to the original owner. So God set that up so that families would not be destitute based on what an ancestor did. If an ancestor gave away all of the property for, sold it for drink, sold it for whatever reason, got rid of it for whatever reason, all generations and generations of the family members could be destitute with nothing. And so God saw provision so that if things were given or sold, they would go back to the original so that an entire family unit would not be destitute. Marianne?
Question.
Okay.
If this is David,
Are these his sons?
are these physical sons during the millennium, or are they sons that he had when he was here and they're back?
So the question then goes to, we all know, and we're going to find out in our Samuel study about David's sons. We're going to learn them well. David's sons did not always follow in their father's footsteps. And so whether or not David's sons are here or not is up for grabs. As far as we judge, as we talked about, we can't make that judgment call, but it appears that some of his sons were quite rebellious. So whether these are sons that he has during the millennial kingdom, whether these are, which it doesn't seem likely to me because he would be in a glorified body at that point. And so who these sons are is an unknown mystery that you can go online and read about lots of people's opinions about whether it's his actual sons coming over from the Old Testament, or whether or not these are new sons that somehow he achieves, or what. But we do know that he has sons, and and so this is one of the things that if people argue that this isn't David, this is one of the things that they argue is they use that point.
Yep.
So that one I can't answer the question for you.
Wouldn't you think that it would be just those that are in the kingdom, the millennial kingdom?
Well, I'm just looking at it.
Sure, I absolutely had the same question.
Yeah, it is confusing.
I absolutely had the same question. Now David also had some good, sons, and Jonathan was one of them, and so he, sons that David may have, Solomon, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't think it disqualifies him from being the prince by any means. Sons maybe just means two. I don't know. But it certainly is an argument that people use when they argue that it can't be David. So if he gives it to his sons, it's theirs permanently. But if the prince gives land to a servant or anyone else, they can keep it until the year of Jubilee, and something that they would be very familiar about, and they feel like that's a very fair way of doing it. Verse 18, moreover, the prince shall not take any of the people's inheritance by evicting them from their property. He shall provide an inheritance for his sons from his own property, so that none of my people may be scattered from his property. So once again, God is just making provision for his people, that the prince is going to have plenty of land. His sons are going to have plenty of land. The old days where royalty could just go out and take whatever they choose doesn't seem to apply here. It's not going to be something that they need.
So the land that's given to the house of Israel, to the tribes, is it in the
No,
square?
it's going to be separate, and we're going to read about that in our last chapter. Next week we'll start in on that, and we'll start seeing how the land is going to be divided up. But it is not going to be in that area where the temple sanctuary is and all of that. It's going to be outside of that area. And we'll do
'Cause I was
some,
thinking, there's a lot of people.
yeah, no.
Divide that land
And
between-
remember, where it's going to be, Israel is going to expand its borders from what it is existing
Yeah.
today. It's going to be much larger than that. So, today Israel is 273 miles long, and it is 71 miles in its widest point, 9 miles in its narrowest point. That's not a very big piece of land to divide up. And so we're going to see that there's going to be some division, but there's also going to be some area that's not totally subdivided up to the people, that's going to be vacant land, maybe you would say, or land that isn't totally divided up. But we're going to get onto that when we go into the subdivision next week.
That'll be the green belt.
Yeah. All right, so verse 19, how the offerings were prepared. Now he brought me through the entrance, which was at the side of the gate, into the holy chambers of the priests, which faced toward the north. He being who? Okay. The angel is the one who does the transporting, right? God's voice appears wherever Ezekiel is. So it doesn't matter where he goes, inner court, outer court, wherever he's at. When God speaks to him, God's voice is already there. But in the transporting of it, it is always the angelic guide that takes Ezekiel to where he is. So he brought him through the entrance, which was at the side of the gate, into the holy chambers of the priest, which, this is the Zadok priests now, which faces towards the north, and there was a place situated at the extreme western end. And he said to me, this is the place where the priest shall boil the trespass offerings and the sin offerings, and where they shall bake the grain offerings, so that they do not bring them out into the outer court to sanctify the people. So that tells us it's the inner court. We know that the Zadok priests are in charge of that, where it's going to be taken care of. Now, it's interesting that he says they don't bring out these offerings into the outer court so that it doesn't sanctify the people. Remember, he said that same thing about something else. Anybody remember what it was? It was what the priests were wearing. The garments.
Yes.
He said, don't wear your garments out into the outer courts, because that which is holy does not sanctify that which is common. So those are to be kept for the ministering only of the Lord. So he's very, very clear. It's another little example of certain things are holy and they're to maintain their holiness, and certain things are common. That doesn't make them bad in any way. The people are to participate in those, but the holy things are to remain holy, and specific items are to be only for that holy place. So God we've talked about this a number of times. It's another clear example of don't bring that which is holy into that which is common. There's an area of separation where there needs to be guidelines, boundaries of that. And God's really clear about this in so many different cases of this. Verse 21, then he brought me out into the outer court. So he's left the inner court now and he's going into the outer court. Ezekiel's moving really fast here, isn't he? And caused me to pass by the four corners of the court. And in fact, in every corner of the court there was another court. So look at the little map that I gave you and you will see the outer court. In each corner of it, there's a little area. He says, in the four corners of the court were enclosed courts. They're 40 cubits. Cubits is in italics. but 40 cubits long and 30 wide. All four corners were the same size. So if you look at the four corners of that little map that I gave you, you can see that there are four little areas in the outer courts, and these are going to be used for something very specific. Now, who is in charge of this outer court area? We know the Zadok priests are taking care of the inner court. The regular Levite priests are maintaining that outer court area, right? And so these four areas that he's talking about here are under the jurisdiction of the Levite priests. 23. There was a row of building stones all around in them, all around the four of them, and cooking hearths were made under the rows of stones all around. And he said to me, these are the kitchens where the ministers of the temple shall boil the sacrifices of the people. And so these four corners are where the regular Levites are going to take the offering and prepare when it needs to be boiled, and their kitchen areas set up with stones and appropriate utensils to be used as a kitchen area. Any questions on that?
To be brought out to what they call here the restaurants.
Yeah, exactly. So just a clear example of what it is that God has prepared for this and how he wants this used in specific detail. Does anyone have any questions? No?
That one picture shows all the restaurants.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
But that's where the people are, they're called that because that's where the people are going to eat the fellowship offerings. We talked about them being the appropriate size for a group of about 30 to 40 people, where you could meet together with your family and have a fellowship offering and eat. When that happened, you ate the food as well as the priests ate the food, and some was given to the Lord. And so it's a communal meal. You're breaking bread with God. It's just kind of an interesting concept, but it's certainly being set up for that.
We do it at church too.
Yeah, we do. Francie, you might want to turn this off now because we're going to do some more reading, and I'm not sure that people will participate in that.